can, as with most things these days, buy Raccooclay, pre-made in a plastic bag. But should you? I mean, it's ridiculously easy to modify pretty much any clay to make a Raku-worthy clay body. And in doing it yourself, you'll learn more about clay and deepen your connection to the medium. The basic premise of Raku is that you need a clay that will withstand thermal shock. The reason most ceramic pieces will crack when subjected to thermal shock is that clay, like all materials, expands and contracts with temperature change. And when that change is very rapid, the amount that the clay expands or contracts is too great, and a weakness is found in the piece, and it cracks there to accommodate the change in size. But Raku clays have two important qualities. One, they shrink less, and two, they have more room within the clay itself to accommodate changes in size. Here I'm mixing together several different clay bodies to experiment with percentages of different clays and sand and grog. I'm using one commercial clay, a Cone 6 Georgie's Red, which I've actually used successfully in pit firing, and a couple different wild clays I dug here in Idaho. This sand is just sand from one of those tubes you buy at a gas station to put weight in the back of your truck in winter. It's nothing pure, but I did sieve it through mesh to remove really big stuff. In the future, I'll experiment with different sands too. I'm really not sure what difference it will make. And I'm using different types of grog too. It's all bisque-fired clay, but some is wild unprocessed clay, some is processed wild clay, and some is commercial clay. It's all sourced from pieces that just didn't turn out well from the bisque kiln or the pit fire. I grind it up, just banging on it with a hammer, and sieve it to get a relatively homogeneous size of particle. Then I weigh out my clay. I'm doing about half kilo pieces of clay to throw tea bowls with, so I'm weighing out about 400 grams of clay and adding about 100 grams of grog or sand. And again, I'm playing around with the percentages here. So in any case, I'm adding up to 500 grams and just kind of changing how much clay versus how much sand or grog goes into the piece. That way I can see how little sand or grog I might be able to get away with to improve the throwing workability of a piece and still have it withstand the Raku firing. Raccooclay shrinks less because it contains grog and or sand. Grog is already fired pottery, ground up and wedged into your clay. So take those failed pit fire pieces and repurpose them as grog. Because it's already been fired, it's already shrunk from bone dry to fired, which means it won't shrink anymore when you fire it to Raku temperatures. And sand, because it's quartz, and quartz melts at something like 1700 degrees Celsius, will also not do any appreciable changing in size at Raku temperatures. Right? Oh, but Ben, you might be asking, what about quartz inversion? Yes, so quartz inversion refers to the fact that quartz does not expand and contract in a linear way with temperature. Around 570 degrees Celsius, it rapidly expands when heating, or contracts when cooling, about 2%. And this 2% is really significant in relation to how little these materials expand or contract generally. And I'll go into more detail on this in a future video when I talk more about the science of firing ceramics, but that's the gist of it. Quartz inversion is a big reason why pottery needs to be heated and cooled gradually to get it through this temperature range slowly. So if quartz has such a high thermal expansion at this temperature, which you do surpass in Raku, how can it be useful in Raccooclay, which needs to withstand thermal shock, where the piece is heated and cooled very rapidly, with no concern for the quartz inversion point? The short answer is, I have no idea. I've not been able to find a satisfactory answer, and in fact, I haven't been able to find anyone even discussing this. It makes me wonder if there's something I'm misunderstanding about the use of sand in a Raccooclay body. And that gets me to the second thing about Raccooclay that makes it special, Raccooclay can accommodate expansion and contraction because it is porous. So it's porous because it's underfired. If you saw my pit fire video, I explained that when clay is heated up, it first sinters, where the clay molecules begin to melt together. And then at higher temps, it vitrifies, where the whole clay body becomes one hard, non-porous, relatively homogeneous thing. Clay shrinks in the kiln because it's losing its porosity, because it's literally melting together and forming a harder, denser material. But Raccooclay doesn't get fired to high enough temperatures for that to happen. A vitrified clay is stronger and more durable at room temperature, but when subjected to rapid temperature changes, it has no open space within the material to accommodate changes in size. So it makes an open space in the form of a crack. So the basic premise of making a Raccooclay is add sand or grog to a stoneware clay. You want to use a clay that will mature at temperatures well above what you reach in Raku, which is usually somewhere around bisque fire temperatures. How much clay or sand do you add? Well, I experimented, and based on some suggestions from this book, Raku by John Dickerson, I added between 33% and 45% grog or sand to a clay body. Now, these percentages are for mixing up a dry clay, so they don't include water. If you add 33% sand to an already wet and workable clay, it's going to be way too much sand. So I found adding something like 20% to an already workable clay was about right. My current hypothesis on why sand is good in Raccooclay, even though the Quartz Inversion might imply that it isn't, is because the sand acts as kind of a support for the non-vitrified clay. In the same way that rebar reinforces concrete by giving it a rigid structure and something to bond to, I think sand kind of does a similar thing where it's got these larger, stiffer particles within the clay that kind of give it a little bit more structure when it's fired. I don't know if that's true. All I know is traditional suggestions for Raccooclays include adding a bunch of sand. This doesn't totally make sense to me considering the Quartz Inversion, but it does in fact work. So there's some daylight there between my understanding of how quartz reacts in the kiln and what actually happens in a Raku piece. If you know a good answer, please let me know. Thank you to the handful of people who have been actually financially supporting me through my website. I really appreciate that you value what I'm putting out here and that you're actually willing to support me to continue doing it. So thank you very much. As always, continue experimenting, playing around with things, and let me know what works for you and what doesn't. That way everyone here as a community can kind of crowdsource information and continue learning together. Thanks for watching.